She quit the most dangerous job in Chicago, and the most dangerous man in the city bought her entire building to make her stay. Nyla Ashcroft spent 3 years organizing a mafia empire without flinching. She corrected a crime lord's schedule. She criticized his suits. She was the only person in the building who wasn't afraid of him. Then one phone call at 3 a.m. changed everything. She walked away. He didn't let her go. This is a story about power, obsession, and a woman who didn't know her own worth, until someone terrifying showed her. Stay until the end. Like, comment, and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The phone rang at 3:17 in the morning. Nyla knew the exact time because she had been awake anyway, lying flat on her back in the dark with her eyes open, listening to the city breathe outside her window. Chicago in October had a particular sound, wind coming off Lake Michigan in long, cold exhales, rattling whatever was loose on the fire escapes, pushing against glass that was never quite thick enough. She had lived in this apartment for 4 years, and she still hadn't gotten used to that sound. Some nights it felt like the city was warning her about something. She let the phone ring twice before she looked at the screen. Unknown number. No area code she recognized. Her thumb hovered over the red button for a moment, and then something she couldn't explain made her answer. Ms. Ashcroft. The voice on the other end was flat, male, no accent she could place. You are going to access the Moretti Global Offshore Transfer Portal tonight. Authorization code 77 Alpha 9. The amount is 4.3 million. You will confirm the routing, and you will not discuss this call with anyone. Her chest stopped moving, just for a second. A single, full second where her lungs simply forgot what they were supposed to do. I don't know who you are, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. That was muscle memory. 3 years of being Lucien Moretti's executive assistant had trained her to sound calm even when her hands were shaking, and right now her hands were shaking hard enough that she had to grip the phone with both of them. But you have the wrong number. We don't. A pause. She could hear breathing on the other end, slow, deliberate, the kind of breathing that belonged to someone who had made calls like this before and found them boring. You have Level 3 access to Moretti Global's financial systems. Your credentials are registered to your personal laptop. Model number. She hung up. She sat in the dark for a long time after that, her phone face down on the mattress, her heart beating somewhere in the back of her throat. She stared at the water stain on the ceiling, the one shaped vaguely like the state of Florida that her landlord had promised to fix 6 months ago. And she thought about what had just happened with the careful, methodical part of her brain that never fully shut off. Someone had her work credentials. Someone knew her access levels. Someone had called her at 3 a.m. and expected her to move $4 million without blinking. She got up. She put the kettle on. She stood in her kitchen in her socks on cold tile, and she thought about the past 3 years with the kind of clinical clarity that only comes at 3 a.m. when the city is making that sound outside your window, and you are suddenly very awake. She had always known what Moretti Global Shipping really was. She wasn't naive. She had never been naive, not once in her 31 years, and the idea that a girl from the south side of Chicago who had fought for every single thing she had ever earned would somehow stumble into a mafia organization without noticing was almost insulting. She had noticed. She had noticed the bodyguards who stood too still in the hallways and never made eye contact. She had noticed the meetings that weren't on the calendar and the visitors who didn't sign in at the front desk. She had noticed the way certain phone calls made Lucien's entire body language shift, the way his jaw tightened, the way the warmth drained out of his eyes until they looked like 2 pieces of gray ice, the way everyone in a 20-foot radius seemed to instinctively take a step back. She had noticed all of it, and she had made a choice every single morning for 3 years. She got up, she put on whatever outfit made her feel like herself. The good blazers, the wide-leg trousers, the earrings that her grandmother left her, and she went to work. She managed Lucien Moretti's impossible schedule. She filtered his calls, she organized his meetings. She proofread his contracts and occasionally reminded him to eat something that wasn't espresso and contempt. She was brilliant at her job. She knew she was brilliant at her job. And she told herself that as long as she stayed on her side of the line, the logistics side, the scheduling side, the side with the legal import records and the legitimate cargo manifests, she was fine. The phone call at 3 a.m. had just informed her, politely and without apology, that the line she had been standing on was thinner than she'd thought. She didn't sleep again that night. She spent the rest of the dark hours sitting at her kitchen table with her untouched tea going cold beside her, writing a resignation letter on her laptop. She rewrote it 4 times. The first version was too emotional. The second was too formal. The third sounded like she was apologizing for something, and she deleted it immediately because she had nothing to apologize for. The fourth version was 1 paragraph, professional and direct, and she read it back to herself twice before she closed the laptop. By the time daylight started coming through the kitchen window, gray and reluctant, the way Chicago light was in October, she had made her decision. She was done. The offices of Moretti Global Shipping occupied the top 4 floors of a glass tower on Michigan Avenue, and on any given morning they looked like exactly what they were supposed to look like, the operational hub of a billion-dollar international logistics company. The lobby had marble floors and a security desk and large abstract sculptures that Nyla privately found hideous but had never said so out loud. The elevators were fast and silent. The conference rooms were always clean. The whole place operated like a machine that had been tuned to a very specific frequency, and she had been for 3 years one of the most essential components of that machine. She walked in at 8:45 that morning. She was wearing her best charcoal blazer, the structured one that cost her 2 weeks of pay and was worth every cent. And her hair was up, and her earrings were the gold hoops her grandmother had given her when she graduated college. She had dressed this way deliberately. She was not coming in here looking like someone who had spent the night awake and terrified. She was coming in here looking like herself. Marcus, the head of security, nodded at her from the front desk. She nodded back. The elevator took her to the 39th floor. Lucien's office was at the far end of the executive suite, behind 2 sets of glass doors and an antechamber where Nyla's desk lived. She set down her bag. She straightened the notepad on her desk that didn't need straightening. She picked up the resignation letter she had printed before leaving home, folded it once along the center crease, and held it in both hands. Then she knocked on his door. "Come in." His voice never changed. That was one of the things about Lucien Moretti that she had cataloged in the privacy of her own mind. The man's voice operated at one temperature regardless of whether he was discussing cargo manifests or presumably ordering whatever it was men like him ordered when someone disappointed them. It was a low voice, controlled, with the faint remnant of something Italian underneath it that only surfaced when he was tired. She had heard that accent exactly 3 times in 3 years. She pushed the door open. Lucien was at his desk, and he was not looking at her. He was looking at something on his monitor with the focused intensity of a man who is either genuinely absorbed or performing absorption. He was wearing a charcoal suit, different shade from hers, darker, and his dark hair was slightly less perfect than it usually was, which meant he had come in earlier than her, which meant he had probably been here since before 7. He was 41 years old, and he was unreasonably good-looking in the way that certain men were, not soft, not pretty, but structured, like someone had decided to build a face out of angles and shadows and hadn't wasted a single line. She had never said that out loud either. "I need 5 minutes," she said. He looked up. The gray eyes. There they were. They found her face with that particular focus he had, the kind that made people feel like they were the only thing in the room, which was either a gift or a weapon, and she had never quite decided which. "You're early," he said. "I'm always here at 8:45. "You look like you didn't sleep." "I need 5 minutes," she said again. She held out the folded letter. He looked at it. He didn't move to take it. "What is that?" "My resignation." The room was very quiet, the kind of quiet that had weight to it, that pressed against the walls from the inside. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago was fully awake and busy and indifferent, 39 floors below them. Inside this office, nothing moved for about 4 seconds. And 4 seconds is a long time when someone is looking at you the way Lucien Moretti was looking at her. "Put it on the desk," he said. She crossed the room and placed the letter on the corner of his desk. He didn't look at it. "I got a phone call last night," she said. "At 3 in the morning. Someone wanted me to authorize an offshore transfer. 4.3 million. They had my system credentials." Still nothing on his face. She had always wondered if he practiced that blankness or if it came naturally to him. "I'm not going to do that," she said. "I want to be very clear that I have never done anything like that, and I never will. But the fact that someone out there thinks I can be used that way tells me that I have gotten too close to things I never wanted to be close to. I've been here 3 years. I've been good at this job, but I need to go." A beat of silence. "No," Lucien said. She blinked. "Excuse me?" "No." He said it the same way he said everything, like it was simply the weather. "I'm not accepting that letter." The heat that moved up the back of her neck was not embarrassment. It was something rawer than that. "Lucien, you don't get to decide whether I resign. That's not how employment works." "Open it." He meant the letter. He still hadn't touched it. "I wrote it. I know what it says." "Then you know it requires 60 days' notice per the terms of your contract." She had in fact known that. She had thought about it for approximately 2 of the hours she'd spent awake the previous night. "I can discuss compensation for breaking the notice period." "There's no compensation figure." He leaned back slightly in his chair. His hands were flat on the desk, very still. "Your contract has a security clause. Given what you just told me, that someone called you with your own credentials, HR cannot process your departure until the breach is investigated, for your own safety. For my own—" She stopped. She pressed her lips together. She was not going to raise her voice. She had never raised her voice in this office, and she was not going to start now. "You're not keeping me here over a security clause." "I'm keeping you here," he said, and there was something in his voice that was not the usual temperature, something fractionally warmer and infinitely more dangerous. "Because you are the only functional person in this building, and I am not replacing you with some HR-selected candidate who will reorganize my calendar incorrectly and order me the wrong lunch." She stared at him. 2 weeks, he said. "Stay 2 weeks. Let the security team look into the call. Then I will personally sign your release paperwork." She wanted to argue. Every instinct she had, and she had good instincts, they had kept her alive and intact through 31 years of a world that had not always been kind to her. Told her to pick up that letter, put it back in her bag, walk out of this office, and not look back. She had her emergency fund. She had her resume. She had skills that any legitimate company would pay for. But she also had a lease, and a grandmother in a care facility on the north side that cost money she didn't have floating reserves for. And the thing about Lucien's face in that moment, the absolute stillness of it, the controlled way he was watching her with those gray eyes that never showed enough, was that it made her pause. 2 weeks, she said flatly. 2 weeks, he agreed. She turned around and walked back to her desk. She sat down. She opened her laptop. She pulled up his calendar for the day and began going through his morning briefing the same way she did every morning. And she told herself very firmly that she had made a practical decision based on practical circumstances, and that nothing about the way Lucien Moretti's voice had changed by exactly 1 degree when he said, "I'm keeping you here," had anything to do with it. She was wrong about that too, but she didn't know it yet. The 2 weeks were the strangest of her career. Lucien didn't argue. He didn't plead. He didn't do anything that she could point to and say, "Here, this is manipulation. I can see the mechanism." He simply went distant in a way that was different from his usual distance. His usual distance was executive, professional, the distance of a man who ruled a room by not needing anything from it. This new distance had edges. It was the distance of someone who had made a decision and was waiting very patiently for the consequences to arrive. HR sent 3 candidates for her replacement. Lucien rejected the first one after a 2-minute interview. He rejected the second one before the interview started. She heard him tell Marcus from behind the closed door that he didn't have time. The third candidate, a sharp-looking woman from a recruiting firm downtown, lasted 12 minutes before she came out of his office with a slightly stunned expression and told Nyla in a lowered voice, "He asked me to name every major port between Rotterdam and Shanghai from memory. Yes, me ban." "Did you?" Nyla asked. "Of course not." Nyla said nothing. She could have named them. She had named them once, off the top of her head, during her second month on the job when Lucien had been testing the limits of what she knew, and the way his expression had shifted, just barely, just for half a second, was the first time she had understood that she had something he genuinely valued. She filed the memory away and kept packing her desk drawer a little at a time, each evening after he left. On day 11 of her 2 weeks, she came home to find an envelope slid under her apartment door. Formal letterhead. A law firm she didn't recognize. She opened it in the hallway and read it standing up. The building had been sold. Effective immediately, all existing lease agreements were terminated under the new ownership's right to redevelop. Tenants had 14 days to vacate or sign new agreements under revised terms, and the revised terms were attached on the second page. She read the new monthly figure and read it again to make sure she hadn't made an error, a 300% increase, in 2 weeks. She stood in her hallway with the letter in her hands and the sounds of the building around her. Mrs. Kowalski's television through the wall, the radiator knocking, the city outside. And something cold and certain settled in her chest like a stone dropping into still water. This was not a coincidence. She knew it the same way she knew most things. Not with proof yet, but with the deep, wordless certainty of a woman who had been paying attention for 31 years and knew what patterns looked like. She put the letter in her bag. She went inside. She sat on her couch in the dark for a long time, and for the second time in 2 weeks, she didn't sleep. The next morning, she walked into a law office on the address listed in the letter, ready to fight. She had done her research on the train, tenant rights in Illinois, wrongful eviction precedents, the specific language of the Chicago residential landlord and tenant ordinance. She had notes on her phone. She was ready to be the most informed person in the room. Instead, she walked into a penthouse suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire Chicago skyline, and there were no lawyers in the room. There was one man, sitting at a long table with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up and a cup of coffee in front of him like he was waiting for a meeting that had been on his calendar all week. Lucien Moretti looked up when she walked in. "You bought my building," she said. Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that. "Sit down, Nyla." "You bought my entire building." The word entire came out harder than she intended. "How long have you been planning this?" "Sit down." "I will stand." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up himself, yet all 6 feet of him, unhurried, the way he did everything, and he walked to the window. Chicago spread out below them in every direction, gray and enormous and alive. "There are people watching you," he said. "Not casually. They have been watching you for weeks. The phone call at 3 a.m. wasn't a probe, it was a test. They wanted to know if you'd do it, and when you didn't, they moved to the next option." He turned to look at her. "You." The cold stone in her chest got heavier. "They know that you're the one person in my organization who has direct access to me. Not my security, not my lieutenants, you." A pause. "Which makes you valuable to them in a way that has nothing to do with the shipping business." She understood what he was saying. She understood it completely and immediately, and the understanding moved through her like ice water. "They were going to take me," she said. Lucien held her gaze and said nothing, which was the same as saying yes. She looked around the room, the gleaming table, the windows, the untouched coffee, and she thought about her apartment, her things, Mrs. Kowalski next door, the water stain on the ceiling shaped like Florida. "The building," she said slowly. "Reinforced entry points, security cameras at every exit, 2 teams on rotation." He said it matter-of-factly, the way he reported quarterly earnings. "The other tenants had been relocated at my expense to comparable units within 2 miles. You relocated my neighbors. I kept them safe. You moved people out of their homes. I moved them somewhere better." He walked back toward the table. He stopped a few feet from her and looked at her directly, gray eyes steady. "Nyla, I need you to hear what I'm telling you. You cannot leave my protection right now, not because of the job, because if you walk away from me, don't." The word came out sharp. "Don't say from me like that." Something crossed his face. It was quick and she almost missed it, a flash of something unguarded that didn't belong on the face of a man who was always, always guarded. "If you leave the security perimeter," he said, correcting himself carefully, "they will take you within 72 hours. I have people who confirm this." She stared at him. She stared at the Chicago skyline behind him. She stared at her own hands, which were not shaking, and she was proud of that too. "This is my life," she said. "My apartment. My choices." "I know." "You don't get to just—" "I know." And then quietly, in a voice that was not the usual temperature at all, "I'm sorry." She had worked for Lucien Moretti for 3 years, and she had never once heard him apologize for anything. The silence between them had a different weight now. She felt it pressing against something in her chest that she had always kept very carefully locked, and had no intention of examining in a penthouse above Chicago, while her whole life was falling apart around her. I need to think, she said. Of course. She turned toward the door. She stopped with her hand not quite on the handle. Lucien? She didn't turn around. The phone call, the 4.3 million. Do you know who made it? A beat of silence behind her. I have a suspicion, he said. She stood there for one more second. Then she opened the door and walked out, and the question she didn't ask, the one that was already building in the back of her mind like a storm she could feel coming but couldn't yet see, was whether his suspicion pointed somewhere inside his own organization. Because hers did. She took the stairs down instead of the elevator. 17 floors of concrete stairwell, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, her heels hitting each step harder than necessary because she needed the impact, needed something solid and physical to push back against while her mind was doing what it was doing. By the time she hit the lobby level, her calves ached, and she was breathing harder than the descent warranted, and she didn't care. She pushed through the heavy fire door and walked out into the cold October air on Michigan Avenue and stood on the sidewalk while Chicago moved around her. Cabs, pedestrians, a messenger on a bike who nearly clipped her shoulder and didn't apologize. And she breathed. In, out, in. She was not going to fall apart on a public sidewalk. She had never fallen apart in public in her life, and she was not starting today. She walked 3 blocks north before she trusted herself to stop. There was a coffee shop on the corner, one of those independent places with exposed brick and mismatched chairs. And she went inside and sat down at a table in the back with her coat still on and her bag in her lap, and she ordered a black coffee she didn't want and stared at the table surface while the information rearranged itself in her mind the way information always did. Slowly at first, and then all at once, with the specific clarity of something that had been true for a long time before she was ready to see it. Someone inside Moretti Global had made that phone call. She was certain of it now. Not because Lucien had said, I have a suspicion, though the way he'd said it, flat and careful and without looking directly at her, had told her more than the words did. She was certain because of the credentials. Her system credentials were internal. They lived behind 3 layers of company encryption. You didn't get those from the outside. You got them from someone who already had access, someone who sat on the right floor and had the right clearance and had been close enough to her workflow to know exactly what she could do and what she was worth as leverage. Someone she had probably spoken to, probably helped, probably said good morning to in the elevator without thinking twice. The coffee arrived. She wrapped both hands around the mug and sat with that thought for a while. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Marcus, from Building Security. Miss Ashcroft. Mr. Moretti requests your return to the tower at your convenience. A car is available. She put the phone face down. At her convenience. That was almost funny. As if anything about the last 48 hours had been convenient. As if being told that a rival criminal organization had been surveilling her for weeks, timing her movements, clocking her commute, measuring her as a tool to be used against a man she worked for, was something that fit into the category of inconvenient. She drank half the coffee. She left cash on the table. She went back to the tower. Not because Lucien had sent a car, because she needed answers, and the only place to get them was the same place all the danger was coming from. And she had never in her life been the kind of woman who waited somewhere safe while the problem got worse without her. The 39th floor was quieter than usual when she stepped off the elevator. That should have told her something. Nyla had spent 3 years reading the temperature of that office the way a sailor reads weather. The energy of the assistants at their desks, the speed at which people walked down the hall, whether the glass doors to the executive suite were open or closed. Today the doors were closed and 2 men she didn't recognize were standing outside them, with the specific posture of men who were paid to stand outside doors. Marcus met her at her desk. He was a big man, Marcus. Former military, she had always guessed from the way he held himself. And he had always been straightforward with her in the way that people who deal in physical reality rather than office politics tend to be. He looked uncomfortable right now, which was unusual. There's a meeting, he said. In there? She nodded at the glass doors. Started about 20 minutes ago. Who? He hesitated, 1 second too long. Mr. Moretti asked that you wait here. Nyla looked at him. She looked at the closed doors. She looked at the 2 men standing outside them who weren't Lucien's regular security team. She knew his regular team. She had organized their schedules and their expense reports for 3 years, and neither of these men was familiar to her. Marcus, she said quietly, what is happening right now? He exhaled through his nose. There was an incident at the Rotterdam terminal last night, a cargo shipment, the Adriatic Run, the one that goes out every third Thursday. It was rerouted. Wrong coordinates logged in the system. Container got flagged at customs. She went very still. The Adriatic Run. Third Thursday. She knew that shipment. She had looked at its manifest exactly once, 18 months ago, when Lucien had asked her to cross-reference a scheduling conflict, and she had closed the file within 30 seconds because she had understood within 30 seconds that the listed cargo and the actual cargo were not the same thing, and she had made the same choice she always made. She filed it away in the part of her mind labeled, "Not my business," and she did not open that drawer again. The container got flagged, she repeated. It was recovered. Nobody's in custody. He said it like that was supposed to make her feel better. But the coordinates in the system, someone changed them from inside the building. The log shows the entry came from a workstation on this floor, 3 nights ago. 3 nights ago, she had been working late. She remembered it clearly. She had stayed until nearly 9 to finish a contract review Lucien needed for a morning meeting. She had been the last person on the floor, or she had thought she was. "My workstation?" she asked. Marcus looked at her for exactly the right amount of time, which was to say, not too long, not the way a man looks at a suspect, but long enough that she understood the question had already been raised. "The log entry came from your machine," he said. "We know the timing doesn't match your badge out. Someone else was at your desk after you left." She sat down in her chair because her legs decided to make that choice for her. She put her hands flat on the desk. The surface was smooth and cool, and she pressed her palms against it and breathed. Someone had used her computer. Someone with access to the floor, to the office, to her specific workstation, had sat in her chair and rerouted a shipment and let the entry log point directly at her. "Who else has badge access to this floor after hours?" she asked. "That's what they're discussing in there." She looked at the closed glass doors again. Through the frosted lower half, she could make out shapes. Multiple people, seated around the conference table. She could hear the low murmur of voices, but not the words. "How many people in that room?" 6. "Name them." "Nyla, Marcus." She looked at him and she kept her voice level. "Someone sat at my desk and committed what I am going to assume is a fairly serious crime and signed my name to it. I have a right to know who is in that room." He pressed his mouth together. Then he counted on his fingers, low, like he was doing her a favor he didn't want anyone to notice. "Moretti, Reeves, Santini, the 2 from downstairs, and a woman I don't know, some came in with Reeves." Reeves. Daniel Reeves. VP of Global Logistics. 47 years old, Yale MBA, had been with Moretti Global for 9 years. He was the kind of man who used everyone's first name and remembered everyone's birthday and had a firm handshake and never, not once in 3 years, had given her any specific reason for the cold feeling she had always gotten from him in unguarded moments. The feeling she had always filed under professional instinct and left alone. She stood up. "Nyla," he said to wait. She was already at the glass doors. She pushed them open. 6 people turned to look at her. The room was tight with something that had been building before she walked in. She could feel it the way you feel a room that's been arguing, even when the argument has paused. Lucien was at the head of the table. His jacket was on. His face was the closed, iced-over face she knew meant he was managing something he found dangerous. Beside him was a man she didn't recognize. Late 50s, silver hair, the kind of expensive stillness that came from decades of being the most powerful person in whatever room he entered. Santini, the CFO, was to Lucien's left, looking like he'd aged 10 years since yesterday. And Daniel Reeves was seated directly across from Lucien, with his hands folded on the table and the smooth, prepared look of a man who had been expecting exactly this conversation and had rehearsed his part in it. The woman beside Reeves was small, dark-haired, with a laptop open in front of her, and eyes that moved to Nyla immediately and assessed her in under a second. Not a lawyer. Something else. "I need to be in this meeting," Nyla said. Nobody moved. Lucien looked at her. The gray eyes. She held them and did not look away. "Ms. Ashcroft," said Reeves, and his voice had the particular warmth of a man who is performing casualness under pressure. "This is an internal security matter. I don't think—" "My workstation was used to reroute the Adriatic shipment," she said. She didn't look at Reeves. She kept looking at Lucien. 3 nights ago. After I badge out, whoever did it wanted the log to point at me. A beat. I'd say that makes it my business. The room was quiet. Lucien pulled out the chair to his immediate right. Sit down, he said. Reeves shifted in his seat, just slightly. She caught it, the small, controlled adjustment of a man recalculating. She sat down. The next hour was the most educational of her professional life. The woman with the laptop was named Carla, and she worked for a firm Lucien described only as specialized internal risk management, which Nyla translated without difficulty. Carla had pulled 3 weeks of system access logs, badge entry records, and internal communication metadata, and she was laying them out in a flat, precise voice that had no investment in any particular outcome, just the data. The data was damning, not for Nyla, for the pattern around her. 12 instances over 7 weeks of off-hours access to the executive suite, 9 of them on nights when Nyla had worked late, a detail that Carla highlighted without editorializing. The workstation used in the Adriatic incident had been accessed remotely via an internal IP relay, which meant someone hadn't physically sat at Nyla's desk. They had mirrored it, cloned her session, from somewhere else in the building. What floor does the relay trace to? Nyla asked. Carla looked at her laptop. 37th? 37th floor. Global Logistics Division, Daniel Reeves's floor. Nyla put her hands in her lap under the table so no one would see that she had made them into fists. Reeves leaned forward. His voice was still warm, still controlled, but there was something underneath it now. A vibration, like a wire pulled too tight. This is circumstantial. IP relays can be spoofed. I'd like to know why my floor is being targeted in this investigation rather than looking at the more obvious external breach. There was no external breach, Carla said, without looking up. The access points are internal, all of them. Carla. Reeves said her name the way powerful men say the names of people they've decided are obstacles. I've been with this company 9 years. I have the highest clearance outside of this room. The suggestion that Nobody said your name, Nyla said. The room went very quiet again. Reeves looked at her. For the first time in 3 years of working in the same building, she saw something real on his face. Not warmth, not professionalism, something cold and flat and calculating that had always been there underneath, and that she had always sensed and never been able to prove. There it was. You're an assistant, he said. Quiet, precise. Like each word was a small, deliberate cut. You schedule meetings and order lunch. You have no place at this table. Lucien moved. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't stand up. He didn't raise his voice. He simply shifted his weight, a small repositioning, and the quality of the air in the room changed the way air changes before lightning. The silver-haired man beside him was watching Reeves with an expression that had gone very careful. Daniel, Lucien said. His voice was quieter than usual, which meant it was more dangerous than usual. Watch yourself. Reeves pulled back. He straightened in his chair. His hands were still folded on the table, and they were very still, and Nyla watched his knuckles and thought, there it is again. I want his workstation, she said to Carla. The 37th floor access logs for the past 3 months, and the communication records between his terminal and any external IPs in the 48 hours before each of those off-hours building entries. Carla looked at Lucien. Lucien gave her one small nod. Reeves stood up. I'm not going to sit here while... Sit down, Daniel. The silver-haired man spoke for the first time, and his voice was the kind of voice that did not repeat itself. Reeves sat down. His jaw was tight. Nyla looked at her hands in her lap. Then she looked up. They broke 2 hours later. The data Carla pulled was not conclusive. Not yet. Not the kind of conclusive that ended things cleanly. But it was the shape of something. A series of external communications from Reeves's terminal to an encrypted relay server that Carla identified as connected to a known address in Eastern Europe. Financial metadata. Patterns. Not proof. A very clear direction. Lucien walked her out of the conference room and they stood in the antechamber outside his office, and the floor was empty by now, everyone else having dispersed in various directions, and it was just the two of them in the fluorescent quiet. You knew it was someone inside, she said. I suspected. How long? He was quiet for a moment. Weeks. And you didn't? She stopped. She pressed 2 fingers against the space between her eyebrows. You were investigating internally. That's why you needed me here, not just for protection. He didn't answer immediately, and his silence was its own answer. She lowered her hand. She looked at him directly. You used my presence as a distraction while you looked for the leak. They're watching me, so while everyone is looking at me, your people look at them. Nyla, that's what the 2 weeks was. That's why you fought so hard to keep me here. Her voice was level. It cost her. I was bait. You were never in danger inside this building. That's not what I asked you. She took a step toward him, which was something she had never done before. Crossed the physical distance he always maintained around himself, entered it deliberately. Was I bait? His jaw tightened, one small muscle at the corner of it. Yes, he said. She stood there with that word sitting in the space between them. It was honest. She had always respected honesty, even the kind that hurt. I'm going home, she said. There are 2 men downstairs. I know. She picked up her bag from her desk. I know there are men downstairs. I know the building is secured. I know I don't have anywhere to actually go because you own my apartment and 300% rent is not something I'm paying on principle. She put the strap of her bag on her shoulder. I'm going home, Lucien. To my apartment. In your building. And tomorrow I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to find out who Daniel Reeves has been talking to. And I'm going to do it because I am very good at finding things other people miss, and because someone used my name and my computer and my job to cover their tracks, and that makes it personal. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. Nyla. His voice came from behind her. She didn't turn around. I didn't lie to you about the threat. Everything I told you this morning, the surveillance, the plan to take you, that was real. The investigation was secondary. The elevator opened. She stepped inside. I know, she said, and the doors closed before he could say anything else. She spent that night at her kitchen table again, but this time with purpose. Her laptop was open, and she was pulling everything she could access legitimately. Moretti Global's public shipping records, the Rotterdam customs incident that had made international logistics news as a routine flagging error, publicly available corporate filings. She wasn't touching anything she shouldn't touch. She didn't need to. 3 years of managing Lucien's schedule meant she had watched enough meetings, heard enough fragments, processed enough documents to have a picture in her head of how the organization operated, the rhythms of it, the patterns. And patterns were what she was good at. She pulled up the shipping schedule for the past 18 months and started cross-referencing delays. Small ones, the kind that got filed as weather or customs or labor disruption. By 2 a.m, she had found 11 of them, all on routes that ran through one particular logistics hub, all within the same 72-hour window before a Moretti Global Executive meeting, before a meeting where sensitive internal information would have been discussed. The delays were not delays. They were information windows. Someone had been buying time for data to move. She sat back in her chair and rubbed her eyes and thought about Daniel Reeves with his Yale MBA and his firm handshake and 9 years of proximity to everything worth knowing. Her phone lit up on the table. Lucien. She looked at it for 2 full rings. Then she answered. I found something, she said, before he could speak. A beat of silence. Tell me, he said. She told him. She walked through all 11 delays, the pattern, the timing relative to the executive meetings. She could hear him breathing on the other end. Steady, focused, the breathing of a man who is listening the way people listen when the information matters. When she finished, the silence lasted long enough that she checked the screen to make sure the call was still connected. Nyla. His voice was different. Not softer exactly. Nothing about Lucien Moretti was soft. But something in the register had changed. This is more than what my security team found in 3 weeks. Your security team was looking for technical evidence. I was looking for behavior patterns. She closed her laptop. They're different things. Another silence. I owe you an explanation, he said. A real one, not just about the building. She was tired. She was genuinely, physically tired in a way that had settled into her bones and behind her eyes, and she did not have the energy right now for whatever was underneath those words. She knew something was underneath them. She had known for a while the way you know a storm is coming before the sky actually changes. something in the pressure, something in the quality of the silence. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. She ended the call and sat in her kitchen and looked at the water stain on the ceiling and thought about how in 24 hours her resignation had become an investigation that she was apparently now central to, and how the ordinary life she had been planning, the ordinary apartment, the ordinary job, the ordinary future, was getting harder to see from where she was sitting. She thought about Daniel Reeves's face in the conference room when she'd said, "Nobody said your name." She thought about the 11 delayed shipments and what they meant and what they connected to. She thought about Lucien saying yes when she asked if she had been bait, and the way it had hit her, not like betrayal exactly, but like something more complicated, like the answer to a question she had been asking without knowing she was asking it. She was still thinking about it when her phone lit up again. This time it wasn't Lucien. The number was the same unknown number from 3 nights ago. She stared at it. 3 rings. 4. She answered. "You found the shipping pattern." The flat, male voice. The same one. That was fast. Her entire body went cold. "We've been watching you work tonight, Ms. Ashcroft. The window above the kitchen table faces the street. You should close your blinds." A pause. Perfectly timed, she thought, designed to let that information land fully before the next part. "We don't want to hurt you. We want to use you. And after what you just found, you're going to be very useful in ways that go far beyond authorizing a wire transfer." Another pause. "Tell Moretti we're ready to deal. Tell him you're the price." The line went dead. She sat completely still for 10 seconds. Then she stood up, crossed the kitchen, and closed the blinds with hands that were not shaking. And she decided in that moment, with a clarity that cut through exhaustion and fear and every carefully maintained boundary she had ever drawn around her own life, that she was done being the piece on someone else's board. She picked up her phone and called Lucien. Back. He answered on the first ring, like he had been waiting. "They've been watching my apartment," she said. "They saw what I found tonight. They know." She pressed her back against the kitchen wall and stared at the closed blinds and kept her voice steady. "They said, I'm the price, that they want a deal." A breath. "Lucien, we have to end this, not your way, our way." She let that word sit for a second. Both of them hearing it for the first time. "And I think I know how." She told him the plan in under 4 minutes. She stood in her kitchen with her back against the wall and the blinds closed, and she talked fast, not because she was nervous, but because the idea was complete. It had arrived fully formed, the way the best solutions always arrived for her. Not built piece by piece, but suddenly present, like something that had been there the whole time, waiting for her to be desperate enough to see it. She laid it out in order. The 11 shipping delays, the timing pattern relative to executive meetings. The fact that whoever was feeding information to the outside had to be working from real-time internal data, which meant they needed proximity to the decision-making process, which meant they couldn't operate remotely. They had to be in the building, in the right meetings, close enough to hear things before they were written down. "We give them something to hear," she said. "Something big enough that they have to move on it immediately. Something that looks like the opportunity they've been waiting for." A long silence on Lucien's end. She could hear him breathing, slow and controlled. "You want to use a false intelligence leak," he said. "I want to use a dinner." She pushed off the wall and started moving, because she thought better when she was moving. Public. Somewhere they can't ignore. We announce it quietly, internally only, through the right channels, that you're meeting with the Caruso Group to discuss a consolidation, that you're ready to hand over the northern shipping routes. The Caruso Group is based in New York. They're legitimate competition. Exactly. Which means if Reeves's people believe you're about to give away the northern routes voluntarily to a legitimate competitor, they lose their leverage over that territory permanently. They have to act fast. She stopped in the middle of her living room. They'll send someone. To the dinner. And whoever Reeves is coordinating with will have to show up in person because something this big doesn't get handled through an encrypted relay server. They'll need eyes in the room. Another silence. Longer this time. "The risk," Lucien said, "is that you're the one in the room." "I know." "Nyla, I know," she said again, firmer. "I'm the price, remember? They said so themselves. Which means if I'm visible, if I'm at that dinner next to you publicly, they will come. And when they come, your people will be there. She heard him exhale. One long, controlled breath. I'll call you back in 10 minutes, he said. It took him 8. The next 4 days moved at 2 different speeds simultaneously. Glacially slow in the open, where everything had to look normal, and at a dead sprint underneath, where nothing was. Nyla went back to work on Monday morning and sat at her desk and answered emails and filed documents and managed Lucien's schedule with the same efficiency she always had, because that was the performance and she was good at performance. She had been performing calm for 3 years in a building full of dangerous men. 4 more days was nothing. Carla worked from a secure room on the 36th floor that Nyla had never been in before. She knew it existed now because Marcus had taken her there on Sunday afternoon to go over the operational details, and the room had the particular smell of a space that never got much fresh air, old coffee and electronics and the faint metallic edge of stress. 3 monitors, a phone system that routed through somewhere else, stacks of printed log files with sections highlighted in yellow and red. Carla had found 3 more external IP contacts from Reeves's terminal, all routed through the same Eastern European relay, all within 12 hours of a Moretti global cargo incident. He's been at this for 2 years, Carla said, without looking up from her screen. She said it the same way she said everything, clean and flat and without visible reaction. Maybe longer. The pattern goes back further than my authorization covers. 2 years, Nyla repeated, at minimum. Nyla thought about the past 2 years, the meetings she had scheduled, the documents she had prepared, the cargo manifest she had cross-referenced without looking too closely. 2 years of Daniel Reeves in the elevator saying good morning with that warm, practiced smile. Does Lucien know the time frame? She asked. He knows. She didn't ask what that meant for Reeves. She could infer. The dinner was set for Thursday. Lucien's team quietly circulated the information through internal channels, the Caruso meeting, the northern routes, the significance of it, in a way that would read as a genuine executive-level leak to anyone monitoring internal communications, which Reeves was, which Carla had confirmed 3 times. By Wednesday afternoon, Carla told them the relay server had showed a significant uptick in outbound traffic. Someone had received the information. Someone had responded to it. They were coming. On Wednesday evening, Nyla was still at her desk at 7:15, finishing a contract review when Daniel Reeves walked past her antechamber. He stopped. She felt him stop before she saw it. A shift in the peripheral, the particular stillness of someone who has made a decision to speak when they didn't have to. She looked up. He was in his coat, ready to leave. He looked tired in a way that his usual composure almost concealed. Almost. Working late, he said. Finishing up. He stood in the doorway. His eyes moved to the glass doors of Lucien's office. Closed, dark. Lucien had left an hour ago. Then back to her. You've been busy this week, he said. I hear you've been spending time with Carla's team. She kept her face neutral. HR asked me to help with an access audit. Routine. Routine. He said the word in a way that wasn't quite agreement. Nyla, I want to say something to you. He stepped into the antechamber. Just one step, but it narrowed the space between them and she felt it. You are very good at what you do. You always have been. And you have been, in my opinion, wasted in this role for a long time. He paused. There are people who recognize your abilities, who would compensate you significantly for them. People who aren't, he glanced at the dark office, what Lucien Moretti is. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the 11 shipping delays. She thought about 2 years. She thought about her system credentials being cloned from 37 floors below her while she was at her desk thinking she was alone. Thank you, Daniel, she said. I appreciate that. He held her gaze for one more second. Something moved behind his eyes, a calculation completing itself. Good night, he said. Good night. She waited until she heard the elevator open and close. Then she picked up her phone and typed one line to Carla. He just made contact. Indirect. He's nervous. Carla's response came back in under a minute. We know. He made a call from the parking garage 30 seconds ago. They're accelerating the timeline. Nyla set the phone face down on her desk and pressed her fingertips flat against the surface and breathed exactly the way she'd taught herself to breathe 3 years ago when she first understood what kind of building she was working in. Tomorrow night. She could do tomorrow night. She was wrong about that. Not about surviving it, about everything else. Thursday came in gray and cold, the kind of day Chicago specialized in. The sky the color of old concrete, the wind finding every gap in your coat. Nyla wore black, not because she was making a statement, but because black was armor, and she needed armor today. The dress was structured, fitted, the kind of thing that said, "I belong in this room without trying." Gold earrings, her grandmother's. She had almost left them at home and then put them on at the last minute because she needed something that was purely hers. Lucien's car picked her up at 7. He was already inside. He looked at her when she got in and said nothing for a moment, which she had learned to read as a form of acknowledgement. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Fine." "Nyla." "Nervous," she said, "but clear." He nodded once. He was wearing a dark suit, no tie. He looked, as he always looked, like a man who had decided a long time ago not to be afraid of anything and had stuck to that decision through sheer force of will. She wondered sometimes what that cost him. She had never asked. "Carla's team has 4 people inside already," he said. 2 more on the street. "Reeves arrived at the restaurant 40 minutes ago." She turned to look at him. "He's already there. Private dining room, 2 floors up from the main floor. He booked it under a different name 3 days ago." A beat. Which means he had this location in mind before we announced the dinner. He's been watching the restaurant. Something cold moved through her. He chose the location before we did. No, we chose it. He anticipated it. Lucien's jaw was set. He knows how I operate. 9 years. They rode the rest of the way in silence. The city moved outside the windows, lit up storefronts, people hurrying on sidewalks. Ordinary Thursday evening Chicago living its ordinary life indifferent to what was happening inside this car. She watched it and thought about ordinary and what it had cost her, and whether she had ever really wanted it as much as she'd convinced herself she did. The restaurant was on the Magnificent Mile, glass and dark wood, the kind of place where the lighting was specifically designed to make powerful people look more powerful. A maitre d' met them at the door with the practiced deference of someone who knew exactly who Lucien Moretti was and had been briefed to treat this evening as completely unremarkable. They were shown to the main private dining room on the 2nd floor. Long table, 2 place settings for show, the Caruso meeting fiction maintained in every physical detail. Carla's people were in position, so she spotted 2 of them dressed as floor staff, one by the bar, and she stopped looking because looking gave things away. They sat. Wine was poured, and Nyla watched the room with the specific attention she had spent 3 years developing and told herself to be ready for anything. She was not ready for what happened. It was Santini. She saw it at 8:47, and it hit her the way the worst revelations hit. Not like a shock, but like something suddenly obvious. Like a picture coming into focus that had been blurry for so long she'd stopped trying to see it clearly. The CFO came through the side entrance at the far end of the hall with the unhurried walk of a man who belonged everywhere he went, and he stopped at the maitre d's podium, and he exchanged 4 words with the man there. And then the maitre d' picked up a phone. Not a restaurant phone, a personal phone, and made a call. Nyla's body understood before her mind caught up. She reached under the table and put her hand on Lucien's arm. He felt the pressure and went still. She leaned in close enough that it would look, to anyone watching, like an intimate exchange, a private word between 2 people at dinner. She kept her voice barely above a breath. "Santini is here." Side entrance. The maitre d' just made a call on a personal phone immediately after speaking to him. She paused. "Lucien, Santini is the contact, not Reeves." She felt the change in him. Not visible, not in his posture or his face, but in his arm under her hand. A single tectonic shift. Something fundamental realigning. "Reeves is the cover," she said. "Someone needed us looking at Reeves." A silence that lasted 2 seconds and felt like 2 minutes. Then, very quietly, "They're both in it." She pulled back. She lifted her wine glass. She looked at Santini, who was now moving through the room toward the elevator, unhurried, a man attending to ordinary business. He had been CFO for 11 years. He had access to everything, every financial record, every routing decision, every internal communication that touched money. He didn't need to clone her workstation. He had his own access. Reeves had been the technical mechanism, the logistics layer. But Santini was the architecture, the one who knew which information was worth selling and what it was worth. And he had been in the room on Monday. He had sat 2 seats from Lucien and listened to the entire investigation and said almost nothing, and she had read his silence as stress, as a man worried about the company's security, and she had been wrong. The realization had a physical weight. She felt it in her chest. "Carla doesn't know," she said. "No. We have to tell her now, before—" The lights went out. Not a flicker. Not a brief interruption. Every light in the dining room cut simultaneously. The ceiling fixtures, the wall sconces, the candles extinguished by a sudden pressure change, as a vent somewhere above them slammed open. Complete darkness, and in the darkness, the sound of movement. Multiple people. Fast. Lucien's hand found her wrist under the table in the dark, and he pulled. Not gently, not asking. And she moved with him because there was no alternative, because in the darkness, with the sound of boots on hardwood floor and the crashing of something overturning somewhere across the room, instinct was the only operational system left. She trusted her feet. She trusted his direction. She did not scream. They were moving toward the wall when she heard Santini's voice somewhere in the dark. He was not whispering. He was not even particularly agitated. He was giving instructions to someone in a language she didn't recognize, and his voice had a quality she had never once heard from him in 11 years of Moretti, global board meetings and quarterly reviews and Christmas parties. Authority, not the borrowed authority of a CFO reporting to a CEO. Something older and more fundamental than that. The authority of a man who had been in charge somewhere much more important for much longer than anyone had known. They hit the wall. Lucien ran his hand along it. A door. Service entrance, she realized. He had known it was there. And then they were through it and into a concrete utility corridor with emergency lighting casting everything in flat red. And Lucien had his phone out and was talking into it in low, rapid Italian that she didn't follow, and she was breathing too hard, and somewhere behind them the dining room was loud in a way that well-designed restaurants were never meant to be loud. "Marcus has the street entrance," Lucien said. He was not breathing hard. She hated him a little for that. "We need to get to the service elevator." "Santini has people upstairs," she said. "Reeves booked the private room above us. If they know we came this way." "They know." He said it without slowing down. "We move anyway." The corridor was long and cold and smelled like industrial cleaning product and old grease. Emergency lighting every 20 feet. She was running in heels, and that was simply a fact she dealt with, and she pulled them off at the 10-second mark and ran in stocking feet on concrete, and the cold shot up through her soles, and she didn't slow down. They reached the service elevator. Lucien pressed the button. The indicator light showed the elevator on floor 4. Coming down. "Stairs," she said. "Elevator might be fine." "Stairs," she said again, harder. He looked at her. He looked at the elevator indicator. Then he pushed through the stairwell door. They were 2 floors down and moving fast when the elevator doors opened above them. She heard it, the mechanical exhale of the doors, and then voices. She pressed herself against the stairwell wall without thinking, and Lucien was already doing the same, one hand flat against the concrete, his body between her and the sound above. Footsteps on the elevator. 2 people, moving toward the service corridor, not the stairwell. They waited. She counted her heartbeats because counting kept her from doing something her body was very strongly suggesting, which was run. 12, 13, 14. The footsteps moved away. They went down the last flight and through the ground-level door into a narrow alley behind the restaurant's delivery bay, and the cold air hit her like something physical, and she breathed it in, and her lungs were burning. Marcus was there. With 2 other men she recognized from the building's security rotation. His face when he saw them was the face of a man on the far side of professional composure. "Where's Carla?" Lucien asked. "Inside. She doesn't know about Santini yet. I tried to reach her, but comms went down when the lights cut." Marcus was already moving, directing the other 2 men with gestures. "We have a car 30 seconds east." "Reeves," Nyla said. "Where is he?" "Private room upstairs. He hasn't moved." She grabbed Marcus's arm. "He hasn't moved because he doesn't need to. He's not the one running the operation tonight. Santini is." Reeves is upstairs to give Santini an alibi. Santini was just a CFO attending a dinner at the same restaurant. Perfectly explainable. Nothing to see. Reeves is sitting in the private room being the obvious suspect while Santini runs the actual operation and walks out clean. She looked at Lucien. They knew we were looking at Reeves. They've known this whole week. Santini was in the room when Carla presented the evidence. Santini knew everything we found and everything we planned. The alley was cold and loud with distant city noise, and she stood in it in stocking feet with her heels in her hand and watched Lucien Moretti's face process what she had just said. She had seen him manage hard information before. She had watched him receive news in meetings that would have broken most men's composure and hold himself together by what appeared to be architectural-grade discipline. She had thought she knew what the full weight of something looked like on his face. She had been wrong about that too. What she saw now was not the ice she knew. It was something underneath the ice. A man who had trusted someone for 11 years and had been wrong, and knew it, and was looking at the full dimension of what that wrongness had cost. How much does he know? Lucien asked. He was not asking anyone in particular. Everything, she said. He's been CFO for 11 years. He knows every route, every contact, every financial structure you have. She pressed her lips together. Lucien, he didn't just sell information. He's been building a complete picture of your entire organization. If he hands that over, he already has. Lucien's voice was quiet, absolute. The voice of a man naming something that cannot be unnamed. That's what the past 2 years were. Not individual leaks, a complete documentation. He looked at her, and his face was controlled again. The ice back in place, harder than before, the way ice that is partially melted and refrozen is always harder than the original. Which means tonight isn't about catching a mole. She felt it coming before he said it. Tonight is about shutting us down entirely, he said. The dinner was never about the Caruso group for them. That was incidental. What Santini told them is that we were investigating the leak. They know we know. Tonight was never a trap for them. She felt the air go out of the alley. We walked into ours, she said. He nodded. A car appeared at the alley entrance. Marcus moved toward it. Lucien's hand found her elbow. Not grabbing, just present. The lightest possible contact that was somehow also unmistakable in its intention. She let him guide her toward the car. She got in. The door closed. The city moved outside the windows again, same as it always had, indifferent and enormous. And she sat in the dark of the back seat and thought about the past 3 years, every meeting she had scheduled, every document she had touched, every morning she had walked into that building and told herself she was on the right side of the line, and she understood now with complete and devastating clarity that the line had never been where she thought it was. She had not been standing near the edge of something dangerous. She had been at the center of it from the first day. Her phone vibrated. She looked at the screen. An unknown number. Not the same one as before. Different, but the same quality of blocked information that meant it was coming from the same origin. She answered without speaking. Ms. Ashcroft. A different voice this time. Not the flat male voice from before. A woman's voice. Older, precise. The voice of someone who had run things for a very long time. You've had an educational evening. I hope you're reconsidering your position. A pause. Moretti Global is finished. This was decided before tonight. What happens to you specifically is still negotiable. Another pause, shorter. But only if you call me back within the next 6 hours. After that, you become a liability rather than an asset, and we handle liabilities differently. The line went dead. Nyla lowered the phone. She stared at the seat back in front of her. 6 hours. She thought about liability. She thought about asset. She thought about a woman's voice that was older than the operation she was describing, and that meant this had roots that went deeper than Santini, deeper than Reeves, deeper than 2 years of shipping delays and encrypted relay servers, and that what she and Lucien had found was not the source of anything but the surface layer of something she could not yet see the bottom of. She turned to look at Lucien. He was already looking at her. "Tell me," he said. She told him. He listened with his jaw tight and his hand still in his lap and the city moving outside, and when she finished, the silence lasted long enough that she felt it in her. The car moved through Chicago like it was any other Thursday night. Nyla sat in the back seat with her heels still in her hand and her stocking feet on the floor mat, and the phone screen dark in her lap, and she counted the seconds the way she had learned to count heartbeats in the stairwell. Not to measure time, but to keep herself tethered to something concrete while her mind worked the problem with everything it had. 6 hours. The woman on the phone had given her 6 hours, which told her several things simultaneously. First, that they weren't in a position to act immediately. If they were, there would be no call, no offer, no negotiable timeline. Second, that she was still valuable enough to proposition, which meant they hadn't yet secured everything they needed from Santini's documentation. Third, and most importantly, 6 hours was also how long they had before whatever they were planning tonight reached its next phase. She said all of this out loud, quietly, to Lucien. He listened. He was very good at listening in the way that people who are accustomed to making large decisions listen, completely, without interrupting, without his expression confirming or denying what he thought. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Carla," and took out his phone. The call connected on the second ring. From Nyla's side, she could hear Carla's voice, flat, fast, slightly compressed the way voices get when the situation has moved beyond what was planned for. "I have Santini," Carla said. "He walked out the main entrance 9 minutes ago. My people have eyes on him." "Don't take him," Lucien said. "Not yet." A pause. "He's going to run. He's going to a meeting. Let him go. Track him." Lucien's voice was the controlled voice, the building temperature voice, but underneath it she could hear something running hotter. "And get me everything you have on an older woman, senior level. Someone above Santini in this chain. Voice communication 6 minutes ago originated from a blocked relay." Another pause, longer. "Above Santini." "Yes." "That changes the scope significantly." "I know what it changes. Get me the information." He ended the call. The car stopped at a red light. Nyla looked out the window. A couple was arguing on the sidewalk. Not badly, just the ordinary friction of two people navigating a city night together. The woman was gesturing. The man had his hands in his pockets. Ordinary Thursday. "We need somewhere to work," she said. "Not the tower. They know the tower. I have a location." "Does Santini know it?" A beat. She watched him think about that. The specific calculation of 11 years, what had been shared and what hadn't. "No," he said, but it came out with half a second of hesitation before it, and that half second told her he wasn't entirely certain, and not being entirely certain in their current situation was the same as saying yes. "We need somewhere Santini has never been and has no reason to know about," she said. "Somewhere that isn't connected to you professionally or operationally." He looked at her. "My grandmother's care facility is on the north side," she said. "They have an administrative conference room. Nobody is looking there." The look on his face was complex. She watched it move through several things before it settled. "Call them," he said. The Lakeview Care Center on West Belmont had the particular nighttime quiet of a place that ran in shifts. Different from daytime quiet. More purposeful. The sounds of equipment and soft footsteps on linoleum instead of conversation. The administrator on duty was a woman named Pat, who had known Nyla since her grandmother moved in 2 years ago and who asked no questions when Nyla said she needed the conference room for an emergency work situation and that she would explain later. Pat gave her the key and went back to her rounds. The conference room was small. A folding table, 8 chairs, a whiteboard with old marker stains, a single window that looked onto the facility's interior courtyard. Lucien sat down without comment. Marcus stood by the door. One of the other security men was in the parking lot. Nyla went to the whiteboard, found a marker that still had something left in it, and started writing. She wrote fast. Everything she had. The 11 shipping delays, the timing, the relay server, Reeves as the logistics mechanism, Santini as the architecture, the woman on the phone as the layer above all of it. She drew lines, she labeled nodes, she stood back and looked at it, and then added 2 more connections that she had thought of in the car and hadn't said out loud yet. Lucien was watching her. "Talk me through the top layer," he said. "Santini has been CFO for 11 years. Before that, he was in Milan. Before Milan," she uncapped a second marker, different color. "I don't know. I never looked because I never had a reason to." She wrote Santini, pre-Milan, on the board and circled it. The woman on the phone is an American. The precision of her English was too calibrated. She She's fluent, but it's a learned fluency, not a native one. And she said we handle liabilities differently. Not I. She's organizational, not individual. She represents something with structure. A syndicate, Marcus said from the door. A syndicate with a woman at or near its top. Nyla put the cap back on the marker. Which narrows it, significantly. She looked at Lucien. Your world, your knowledge base, who fits that? He was quiet for a moment. His hands were flat on the table and he was looking at the whiteboard with a focused stillness. There's a name, he said slowly. She goes by Voss. Nobody I know has ever confirmed a real name. Eastern European background. Built her operation through shipping. Not unlike mine, different hemisphere. She's been expanding west for 3 years. He paused. I have never had direct contact with her. I was told she didn't operate in North American markets. Santini told them that. Another pause. Longer. Santini told them, he said, that I believe she didn't operate here, which means she's been here the whole time, Nyla said, building the infrastructure while you looked elsewhere. Santini was the infrastructure. She put the marker down. She doesn't want your territory, Lucien. She wants your organization intact because you've built something over 30 years that would take her another 30 to replicate from scratch, and buying it from the inside through a CFO is faster and cleaner than a direct move. The room held that for a moment. Marcus said, the documentation? 2 years of complete organizational mapping. She has a blueprint, Nyla said. She just needs to remove the current owner. Lucien stood up. He crossed to the whiteboard and stood next to her, looking at it, and she was aware of his proximity the way she was always aware of it. A specific kind of physical awareness that she had managed for 3 years by giving it no attention and would continue to manage by giving it no attention, especially not right now. She called you, he said. Not me. Yes. She thinks you're the pressure point. She thinks I'm the way in. Nyla looked at the whiteboard. She thinks that if I agree to cooperate, she gets leverage over you. Either I help her or she uses me against you. She turned to look at him directly. She doesn't know that I found the shipping pattern. She doesn't know what I gave you. She thinks I'm still just the assistant. Something moved on his face. You're not. No. She held his gaze. So we use what she thinks I am. One more time. He knew immediately what she meant. She could see it. The way his expression shifted and then locked down. The particular resistance of a man who understood the logic and was fighting it anyway. No, he said. Lucien, you are not calling her back. Someone has to, and it has to be me because I'm the one she called. She kept her voice level. I call her back. I tell her I'm ready to talk. I agree to meet. She held up one hand before he could speak. Not alone. Never alone. But I bring her into the open, somewhere we control, somewhere your people are in position, and we get her and Santini in the same location at the same time, and we end this tonight before whatever her 6-hour deadline is actually means. What does it mean? Marcus asked. She looked at him. I think she has a move planned for after the 6 hours. Something that doesn't require my cooperation because I've declined. Something that uses the documentation Santini gave her to go directly at the organization without needing me as an access point. She looked at Lucien. The 6 hours isn't a deadline for me. It's a deadline for her. She's telling me when she starts without me. The room was quiet. Lucien looked at her for a long time. She met it. She had gotten better at that over the past week, meeting his eyes without looking away from whatever was in them, without managing the moment into something more professional and less real. Where? He said. She called Voss at 11:43. The phone rang 3 times and then the woman's voice was there. Same precision, same weight, same quality of someone who had been awake and waiting. Ms. Ashcroft. I've been thinking about your offer, Nyla said. She was standing in the parking lot of the care facility with the cold finding the back of her neck, and Lucien 4 feet behind her, and Marcus another 6 feet behind him. She sounded calm. She had practiced sounding calm. I want to meet. A pause. Measuring. That's wise. My terms, Nyla said. 1 location. My choice. No more than 3 of your people. I come alone. A beat. You've done enough research to know I'm not stupid. You know I know what happens if I try something, so you know this is a genuine offer. Another pause. Longer. Where? Said Voss. Moretti Global, the tower, top floor. She kept her voice flat. His building, his territory. I want you to know I'm not setting a trap on neutral ground. I'm giving you somewhere that should make you confident that I'm acting in good faith against him. The silence on the line was the silence of someone recalculating, and she held her breath behind her sternum and kept it completely off her face. 2 hours, said Voss. 2 hours, she agreed. The call ended. She lowered the phone. She turned around. Lucien was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not the ice, not the professional distance, not even the fractionally warmer than usual register that surfaced sometimes in the past week. This was something that had no professional category. It was the expression of a man who was afraid, specifically and personally, and who knew she could see it and wasn't moving to conceal it. 1 hour to set up, she said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of it. Can Marcus work with that? Marcus was already on his phone. The lobby of Moretti Global at 1 in the morning looked like a different place. Empty marble floors, security lighting at half. The sculptures that she privately found hideous, casting long shadows that made them look almost bearable. She walked in through the main entrance alone. That was the performance. Cameras would show her entering without escort. Voss's people, and she had to assume Voss had someone watching the building, possibly had someone watching it all week, would see exactly what they were supposed to see. The elevator took her to 39. She sat at her desk. She turned her computer on. She opened the financial system, her own access, her own credentials, the ones that had been cloned and used and that she had spent a week feeling violated by. And she pulled up the offshore transfer portal. 4.3 million. Same as the call 3 weeks ago. She stared at it and thought about everything that had led to this moment, and then she closed the portal without touching it and opened a different application instead. The one Carla had walked her through in the conference room before they'd left for the restaurant. The one that didn't look like anything significant. She typed 3 characters. Hit enter. Somewhere in the building's network, something quiet happened. She sat back and waited. They came at 1:48. She heard the elevator before she saw it. The soft mechanical sound of descent, then the doors opening, then footsteps on the marble of the executive floor. Not 1 set. 3. The way she'd specified. She stood up, smoothed her dress, and walked to the glass doors of the antechamber and opened them. 3 people in the hallway. 2 men she didn't know. Large, still, the particular kind of still that meant professional, and between them a woman. Voss was not what she had built in her mind from the phone voice. She was perhaps 60, perhaps older, small in the way that compact things are small, condensed, not diminished. Silver hair, close cut. A coat that had cost more than Nyla's monthly salary. And eyes that were light-colored and very direct and were moving over Nyla right now with the flat comprehensive assessment of someone taking inventory. Ms. Ashcroft, she said. Same voice. In person, it had a slight Eastern European consonant structure underneath the calibrated English. Miss Voss, Nyla said, a small, precise smile. You know my name. I know several things. Nyla stepped back from the doorway. Please come in. The 3 of them entered the antechamber. Nyla moved behind her desk. Instinct, the geography she knew. And Voss stopped in the center of the room, and the 2 men positioned themselves at angles to her, and everything was very controlled and very polite, and underneath it all, the specific tension of a room in which every person was calculating something. I expected to meet in Moretti's office, Voss said. That's not my office to offer. But you have access. I have access to a great many things. Nyla kept her hands loose at her sides. That's why you called me. Voss tilted her head slightly, reassessing. You've had a difficult week. Yes. You're angry with him. I'm angry with the situation. Nyla held her gaze. Lucien Moretti kept me in the dark for 3 years. He let me work inside this organization without telling me the full extent of what I was working inside. And when the danger reached me personally, his first instinct was to use me as a tool to solve his problem rather than remove me from it. She kept her voice level, almost clinical. I'm not angry with you, Ms. Voss. You were direct with me. That's more than I got from him. Voss studied her. The light eyes moved over her face the way a doctor looks at a chart, searching for inconsistency, for the thing that didn't fit. "What do you want?" Voss said. Direct. No performance of warmth. "I want out. Complete. A new position, somewhere with no connection to this building or this city. Compensation that reflects 3 years of work and risk that I was never fully paid for." Nyla paused. "And I want it in writing before I give you anything." "What are you offering?" "The Northern Route infrastructure, complete. The actual routing system, not Santini's documentation, which I know is good but is still a map of something rather than the thing itself. I can give you working access to the operational systems." She held Voss's gaze. "Tonight." A silence. One of the men behind Voss moved, almost nothing, a fractional shift in weight, and Nyla felt it register in her body before she'd consciously processed it. Her pulse jumped. She held the rest of herself very still. "Santini gave me documentation," Voss said. "Santini gave you a photograph of a building," Nyla said. "I'm offering you the key." Another silence. Longer. The kind of silence in which a decision is actually being made rather than performed. Then Voss said, "Show me." Nyla turned to her computer. Her hands moved to the keyboard. She felt the two men's attention track to the screen, felt Voss step closer, felt the specific quality of attention that 3 people focused on a single point generates in a small room. She typed. What appeared on the screen was not the routing system. It was 11 months of Carlo Santini's internal communications, his external relay contacts, his financial transfers, and the piece that Carla had extracted that afternoon and that Nyla had loaded onto her terminal before leaving for the restaurant. The digital record of every conversation between Santini's encrypted channel and a relay server that Carla had now definitively traced to an IP block registered to a shell company in Vienna. A shell company that Carla had spent 4 hours unwinding through 3 layers of incorporation. A company that ended at its center with a name. Elsa Voss, born 1961, Gdansk. On the screen, in this building, in front of 2 men who worked for her in a record system that had been capturing everything in this room for the past 11 minutes. Voss looked at the screen. She looked at Nyla. And for the first time, the light eyes showed something that was not the controlled assessment of a woman taking inventory. It was the specific, rapid recalculation of someone understanding they have walked into exactly the room they were designed to avoid. "The file is already uploaded," Nyla said quietly, "to 3 separate external locations. And this conversation has been recorded since you walked through the door." She held Voss's gaze and did not look away. "I'm not angry with you, Ms. Voss. I meant that. But I'm also not for sale." Everything happened in the next 4 seconds. The man to Voss's right moved first, toward Nyla, not toward the door, which told her he'd been specifically deployed for exactly this contingency. She threw herself sideways, taking the chair with her, and the desk was between them, and he came over it fast and her back hit the wall hard enough that she felt it in her teeth, and she had just enough presence of mind to get her arm up before his hand reached her. The glass doors of the antechamber exploded inward. Not exploded, opened, fast and hard, by 4 men moving in a coordinated entry that took less than 3 seconds to fill the room. Marcus was first. She knew his silhouette. Behind him, men she recognized from the building's security rotation, and behind them someone in a jacket she didn't recognize who moved with the specific economy of someone whose profession was this exact type of room. The man who'd come over her desk was on the floor. She hadn't processed the moment of his going down. She had been against the wall, and then he was not standing anymore, and Marcus was between her and the room. The second man had Voss by the arm and was moving for the door, and he didn't get there. Voss herself had not moved. She stood in the center of the antechamber with her coat still perfect, and her silver hair still close cut, and her light eyes moving across the room with that same flat inventory assessment. And she was either the calmest person Nyla had ever seen under these circumstances, or she was past the point where the body bothers to respond to what the mind has already categorized as complete. "Sit down, please," said the man in the unfamiliar jacket, and his voice had an authority that was different from everyone else's in the room, and Voss sat. Nyla pushed off the wall. Her shoulder was going to be a problem by morning. She reached up and touched it, and took a breath, and the breath hurt on the left side, which meant the impact had been harder than she'd processed. She put that information away. She looked across the room. Lucien was in the doorway. He had come up the stairs. That was the only way he could be here before the elevator, and she hadn't heard him on the stairs, which meant he had been on this floor already, positioned and waiting. And she understood now that he had never been 4 feet behind her in the parking lot. He had been closer than that the entire time. He looked at her shoulder. "I'm fine," she said. "You're not," he said. "I'm functional." She straightened. She looked at Voss, sitting now in the chair that Nyla had occupied 20 minutes ago, with 2 of Marcus's men flanking her and her 2 associates secured against the far wall. "The recording." "Captured," Marcus said. "The external uploads. Confirmed to all 3 locations." She nodded. She looked at the whiteboard she had filled 3 hours ago in a care facility conference room, which was now in a photo on her phone and which she did not need to look at again because she had it completely memorized. Everything on the board was resolved. Every node, every line, every connection. Santini was in the hands of Carla's team. She had gotten the confirmation text 14 minutes ago while she was sitting at her desk waiting for the elevator sound. Reeves was in a room on the floor above where he had sat all evening waiting for a signal that was not coming and would not come. The relay server in Vienna was now visible to people who had the authority and the motivation to do something about it. And Elsa Voss, born 1961 in Gdansk, was sitting in Nyla Ashcroft's chair in the executive antechamber of a building she had spent 2 years trying to take. Nyla's shoulder was going to be a serious problem by morning. She looked at Lucien. He was still looking at her shoulder. "We need a doctor," he said, "and then we need to talk." "Yes," she said, "we do." He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her. Up close, his face was the face she had been reading for 3 years, all its angles and shadows, and it was showing her something right now that it had never shown her before in 3 years of daily proximity, the something that had been underneath every professional interaction and every calibrated temperature and every moment of controlled distance. She was too tired and her shoulder hurt too much, and the last 4 hours had been too much for her to look away from it. "You were on the stairs the whole time," she said. "Yes." "If they had moved faster." "They didn't." "That's not an answer to what I said." He looked at her for a moment. Then he reached up, carefully, and his hand came to rest against the side of her face. Not holding, just present, the lightest possible contact that was nonetheless the most deliberately personal thing he had done in 3 years. And he said very quietly, "I know." The room was full of people doing necessary things. Nobody was looking at them. She held very still under his hand and breathed, and the pain in her shoulder was real, and the cold from the broken glass door was real, and the sound of the city 39 floors below was real, and underneath all of it was something else that she had been filing under, not my business for 3 years, and that had just run out of drawer space. "We have a lot to deal with," she said. "We do," he agreed. His hand didn't move. "Starting in about 30 seconds when Marcus needs decisions." "Yes?" "So." She looked at him. "Get ready." He dropped his hand. He turned. And Lucien Moretti, who had never needed anyone to stand beside him in 30 years of running the most feared organization in Chicago, squared his shoulders and looked at his head of security and said, "Tell me what we need." Nyla was already at her desk, already working. The doctor came at 3 in the morning. He was a compact, gray-haired man named Ellison who arrived with a medical bag and no questions, which told Nyla everything she needed to know about the nature of his relationship with Lucien Moretti. He examined her shoulder in the small break room 2 doors down from the executive suite while Marcus stood outside and the sounds of the building being systematically processed moved around them. Low voices, footsteps, the occasional crackle of a radio. "Separated," Ellison said, pressing 2 fingers against the joint with a precision that made her hiss through her teeth. "Not dislocated. You were lucky." "I don't feel lucky," she said. "Most people don't when they're lucky." He reached into his bag. "I'm going to tape it. You need to keep the arm immobile for at least how long before I have full use?" He looked at her over his glasses. 2 weeks minimum before you stop noticing it. A month before you forget it happened." She thought about the next 2 weeks and what they were likely to contain and said nothing. He taped it efficiently and without unnecessary conversation, which she appreciated. When he was done, she rolled her sleeve back down and buttoned the cuff and stood up and tested the range of motion. Limited, painful, functional. She could work with functional. "Thank you," she said. He snapped his bag shut. Don't use it as a reason to stop moving. Shoulders freeze if you favor them too long. She filed that away beside everything else and went back to work. The 39th floor looked by 4 in the morning like the aftermath of something that had been contained rather than something that had exploded, which was exactly what it was. And the distinction mattered. The glass doors of the antechamber had been replaced with a temporary security panel. Carla's team had swept every terminal on the floor and was running a systematic audit of the past 24 months of system access, which Nyla knew would take days and not hours, but whose first findings were already coming through in printed reports that someone kept placing in a growing stack on the conference table. Voss was gone. Not escaped, transferred in the back of a vehicle with tinted windows to a location that Marcus had described only as secure and that Nyla had not pressed him on because she understood the category and had decided, standing against a wall with a man's hand around her arm and her shoulder going white-hot, that she was done pretending not to understand the categories. Santini was in a different location, also secure. Carla had sent a one-line text at 2:47. He cooperated immediately. Full accounting ongoing. That word, cooperated, landed in Nyla's mind with a particular weight. 11 years. 11 years of sitting 2 seats from Lucien Moretti in board meetings, of signing off on financial structures, of knowing exactly what the organization was and choosing over and over every quarter for 11 years to sell it piece by piece to someone who wanted to dismantle it. She tried to locate anger about it and found something more complicated, a kind of exhausted clarity, the feeling of a thing being over rather than the feeling of justice. Reeves was a different matter. He had been brought down from the private dining room at the restaurant at 10:45, 2 hours before Voss arrived at the tower, and he had sat in a room on the 36th floor, his own floor, which Nyla thought must have had a particular texture for him, and he had apparently said almost nothing for 4 hours except to ask twice for water. Lucien came to find her at 4:15. She was at her desk going through the Carla team's first report, which covered the relay server contacts over the past 8 months, and which was dense with technical detail that she was reading more slowly than she wanted to because her concentration kept sliding off the page. He sat down in the chair across from her desk, the chair that was usually empty, that was there for the rare occasions when someone needed to wait. She had always thought of it as a waiting chair, a temporary occupancy chair, a chair that nobody stayed in. He sat in it like he had decided it was his and had always been his, and she was only now being informed. "Reeves wants to talk," he said. "To you?" "To you." She looked up from the report. "Why?" "He won't say." He asked specifically. Lucien's voice was even, but she had learned to hear the things that lived underneath even. "You don't have to." She thought about the elevator on Wednesday evening, the practiced warmth. "You are very good at what you do. There are people who recognize your abilities." She thought about what it cost to look someone in the face and perform goodwill for 2 years while feeding the architecture of their life to someone who intended to demolish it. "I'll talk to him," she said. The room on 36 was a standard office that had been emptied of its usual occupant and contained now only a table, 2 chairs, and Daniel Reeves. He looked smaller than he had in the conference room on Monday. She noticed that immediately. The particular deflation that happens to a man whose performance has stopped being necessary, the way the body drops the posture it's been maintaining when there's no longer any audience for it. His jacket was off. His hair, which was always precisely managed, had been touched too many times in the past several hours and showed it. He was sitting with his forearms on the table and his hands loose, and he looked up when she came in. She sat down across from him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "How's your shoulder?" he asked. "You saw that." "The camera feed, before they cut it." He looked at his hands. "I want to say I didn't know that was going to happen tonight. The physical—" He stopped. "Voss's people were supposed to extract you, not—" "Extract me," she repeated. He flinched, just slightly. "Take you somewhere safe. That was the framing. That you be removed from the situation and given the option to—" "Daniel." She said his name the same way she always said it. Flat, professional, no heat. "Stop." He stopped. She looked at him across the table. She looked at the lines around his mouth that she had always read as the marks of a man who smiled a lot, and that she understood now were the marks of a man who had been performing a smile for a very long time. She looked at his hands, which were not shaking, which told her something about what kind of man he was underneath everything. Why, she said. He knew what she was asking. She didn't need to specify. Money is the easy answer, he said. It's not the complete answer, but it's the one I can give you without… He exhaled. Voss approached me 4 years ago, not 2. 4. Before Santini. Before any of the route documentation. She approached me in Milan at a logistics conference and she offered me a consulting arrangement, which is what it felt like. What I told myself it was. He looked up. I knew what it was. Yes, Nyla said. By the time it was clearly something else, I was already… He stopped again. The word is in. I was already in. And you decided to stay in. I decided that getting out looked worse than staying in. That's different. Is it? She said. He looked at her for a moment. No, he said finally. I suppose it isn't. The room was very quiet. The building around them was not quiet. She could hear activity, distant and purposeful. But this specific room had a quality of suspended time, the way rooms feel when everything that needed to happen in them has already happened. What did you want to tell me? She said. He pressed his lips together. Santini recruited me, or rather, Voss did, through Santini. But Santini came to me first. He came to me because he knew I had access to the routing infrastructure and because he knew… He stopped. Because he knew what? She said. Because he knew that I had tried, twice, to raise concerns internally about how certain routes were being managed, certain cargo, things that made me uncomfortable. He said the word like it was inadequate, like he knew it was inadequate. He came to me and said that Voss's people could offer me a way to address those concerns, that the documentation I provided would be used to build a legal case, an external case, regulatory, against the organization. Nyla sat very still. That's what he told me, Reeves said. In the beginning. And when you understood that wasn't what it was. I understood that about 8 months in. He looked at his hands again. And I chose to continue. Because by then I had taken money and signed documents, and I was in a position where the truth about what I had done was more immediately dangerous to me than continuing. A pause. So I continued. And you redirected the Adriatic shipment. And you cloned my workstation to cover it. Yes. You used me. Yes. He said it without flinching and without apology, and she almost respected that more than she would have respected a flinch. I used your credentials because they were available to me and because I needed the log to point somewhere that Moretti wouldn't immediately investigate. He trusts you. He would have spent time ruling you out before looking elsewhere, and I needed that time. She thought about what it meant that he had known Lucien trusted her, that he had used that knowledge deliberately. She thought about the past week, the way Lucien had fought to keep her in the building, the apartment, the bodyguards, the investigations. And she thought about trust as a thing that had a shape, that could be mapped and measured and exploited by someone paying close enough attention. Is there anything else? She said. He looked at her for a long moment. I want you to know that I genuinely… He stopped. He started again. I did not dislike you. I want that to mean something, even if I understand that it probably doesn't. She stood up. It means something, she said. It just doesn't change anything. She walked out. She found Lucien on the roof. She hadn't known there was roof access from the 39th floor, but Marcus had told her when she came back upstairs, and she had taken the stairs because the elevator felt wrong right now. She needed the movement. Needed the small physical labor of climbing, needed the seconds of simply going up before she arrived somewhere and had to think again. The roof was a service space, HVAC units, ventilation stacks, antenna arrays, not a terrace, not a view platform. Just the functional top of a building at 4:30 in the morning with Chicago spread out in every direction below, and the sky beginning to show the first pale suggestion of something that wasn't quite darkness anymore. Lucien was standing at the north edge, not dangerously close, just at the low safety railing, with his jacket over his arm and his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows and his eyes on the city. She crossed the roof to him. The wind up here was different from street-level wind. It came from everywhere at once, cold and indifferent, moving her coat around her. Her shoulder protested the motion and she ignored it. She stood beside him. Below them, Chicago ran in every direction. Lights and dark water, and the long lines of streets that had been here for 150 years and would be here after all of this. Reeves told me Santini came to him first, she said. That Santini framed it as building a regulatory case. Clean hands. That's what Santini told Carla as well. His voice was even. She had learned to hear the distance between even and fine, and this was not fine. He framed it to himself the same way, that he was building a record that would eventually be used to legitimize the organization, move it towards something, he paused, cleaner. Did he believe that? I think he believed it long enough to keep going, and then the momentum was enough to keep him going after that. He looked at the city. 11 years. He sat across from me for 11 years. She didn't say anything. Some things didn't need a response. They needed space to be what they were. After a while, he said, I want to tell you something. Okay. I told you the first night in the penthouse that the threat to you was real, that it was the reason I bought the building, the reason I kept you here. Yes, that was true. He turned to look at her. The gray eyes, the particular quality of his attention that she had spent 3 years managing and that she was done managing. It was also not the complete truth. The wind moved between them. I know, she said. He looked at her steadily. You've known. I've known something. I didn't know the shape of it. She turned to face him fully, her good shoulder toward the wind. Tell me the shape of it. He held her gaze for a moment that had weight in it, the weight of a man who had decided something that was difficult to decide and was not retreating from the decision. I have been in love with you, Asit, he said, since approximately the 7th month of your employment, when you told me in front of 3 senior executives that my 8 o'clock meeting was double booked and that I had apparently agreed to 2 things simultaneously and should perhaps consider a calendar system that I actually looked at. He said it without performance, without softness, just the plain statement of a fact that had been true for a long time. I have never said anything because the distance between what you deserve and what my life is has always seemed... He stopped. Too large, she said. Yes. She looked at him. She looked at the city over his shoulder. All that ordinary life. All those ordinary lights. The ordinary Chicago Thursday that was now technically Friday. And she thought about the ordinary future she had been planning to walk into when she submitted her resignation. The ordinary apartment, the ordinary career, the ordinary safety of a life with clean edges and nothing dangerous living inside the walls. She thought about this past week, what she had found, what she had done with what she found. The 11 shipping delays and the conference room and the penthouse and Voss's light eyes and the stairwell and Reeves's hands flat on the table and her shoulder and the recording and the 3 characters she had typed into a terminal at 1 a.m. She thought about the moment Lucien had said yes when she asked if she had been bait, and how it had not felt like betrayal but like something more complicated, and she understood now what the complicated thing was. It was the particular pain of caring what someone thinks of you, of needing their honesty to mean something, which was a pain that only arrived in the presence of something that mattered. She reached up with her good arm and put her hand flat against his chest. Just that. Just her hand, flat, feeling his heart through his shirt, steadier than hers, always steadier, the infuriating steadiness of him. I'm not going to be behind you, she said, not behind a desk outside your office, not behind a security detail, not behind anything. She held his gaze. You understand that? Yes, he said. I found what your entire team missed. I built the plan that worked. I sat across from Voss and held it together when... She stopped. Her voice had done something she hadn't given it permission to do, and she waited one breath until it was hers again. I have earned something in this building. You have, he said, and I'm not leaving, not because I can't. We both know the situation has changed enough that I could leave now if I chose to. But because what I found here this week is something I didn't know I was looking for. She looked at him steadily. I'm not your assistant anymore. No, he said. Then we need to talk about what I am. He looked at her hand on his chest. He put his hand over it, large, warm, completely steady, and held it there. We will, he said. Tonight we should sleep. You're going to sleep. I'm going to try. A pause. I haven't slept well in 3 years. She almost laughed. She felt it move through her chest, something that was close to laughter, not quite there yet, but close. the first thing that had been close to anything light in 5 days. "Neither have I," she said. What came after was not simple. She had never expected it to be simple, and the expectation of simplicity had never been her particular failure. The Moretti organization spent the following 6 weeks in a state of careful structural reconstruction that Nyla was involved in from the first day. Not as an assistant managing the calendar of the man doing the reconstruction, but as the person who sat in the room where decisions were made and whose opinion altered those decisions. It was an adjustment for everyone. Not for Lucien, who moved without apparent friction to include her in every conversation that mattered, who consulted her before meetings and after them, who put her name on documents that had previously required only his. For the people around them, the remaining executives, the security team, Carla, who stayed on through the transition, the adjustment was more visible. She watched them recalibrate. She watched them look at her and try to find the category she fit into, and fail to find it and eventually stop looking. She didn't help them find it. That wasn't her job. The legal aftermath of Elsa Voss was handled through channels that Nyla never fully mapped, and was not asked to map, which she understood as a boundary she was choosing to maintain rather than one being imposed on her. What she did know: Voss did not disappear, in either sense of the word. She entered a process that involved people with authority that operated parallel to but separate from the official legal system, and that process was going to take a long time, and the outcome was going to be determined by forces larger than any single organization. The relay server in Vienna was shut down within 4 days of the night at the tower. The shell company was dissolved. Whatever Voss had built in North American markets over the past 3 years began, piece by piece, to come apart, because the documentation that Santini had spent 2 years compiling for her had been in a system that Nyla had accessed and copied before Voss ever walked through those glass doors. The blueprint, in the end, had gone back to the people it had been taken from. Santini cooperated fully and continuously, with the particular cooperation of a man who has understood that his only available future is the one where cooperation is its own currency. Nyla did not attend any meeting where he was present. She did not ask about him. She found, to her own mild surprise, that she had very little feeling about him at all. Not anger, not satisfaction at his situation, just the flat acknowledgement of someone who had occupied a role in the story and whose role was now finished. Reeves she thought about more. Not often. But occasionally, in unguarded moments, she would remember his hands flat on the table and his voice saying, "I did not dislike you." And she would sit with the uncomfortable reality that people were capable of holding contradictory things simultaneously: genuine regard and systematic betrayal, not as a paradox, but as ordinary human architecture. She filed that understanding carefully. It was the kind of understanding that made you better at things, even when it hurt to have it. The apartment building on the north side remained. Lucien had offered, twice, to transfer the deed to her name. Both times she had declined, and both times she had declined for the same reason, which she did not articulate fully to him until the second time, 6 weeks after the night at the tower, on an evening when they were in his office late and the city was doing its nighttime thing outside the windows, and the building was quiet around them. "If I take it," she said, "it becomes something you gave me. And then every time someone in this organization needs to know whose side I'm on, they can point to something you gave me." She looked at him across the desk. "I don't want anything I have to come from you. Everything I have here, I need to have earned." He looked at her for a long moment. "And the apartment building is collateral damage from a situation I helped resolve." She held his gaze. "I'll pay market rent. Current market, not the 300% figure your lawyers invented." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. That figure was a negotiating tool. A terrible one. "You didn't negotiate." "I didn't need to. I had information." She leaned back in her chair. The shoulder was mostly fine now. She'd stopped noticing it at the 5-week mark, which was earlier than Ellison had projected. "Lucien, I need you to hear what I said. About earning." He heard it. She could tell by the quality of his attention, the specific stillness that meant he was not just listening to the words, but to what was underneath them. "You've earned everything here," he said. 3 years of work before any of this. And then this." "I know that," she said. "I need the organization to know it. The way they find out is not through something you gave me. It's through what they watch me do." She paused. "So, the apartment stays as it is. I pay rent. And in 6 months, when the reconstruction is stable and Carla is done with the audit and we know exactly what we have, we sit down and talk about what my role here looks like formally." He was quiet for a moment. 6 months is a long time, he said. "It's the right amount of time," she said. "You know it is." He looked at her across the desk, the gray eyes, the angles and shadows, the face she had been reading for 3 years and would be reading, she understood now for a great deal longer. And he said, "Yes, I know it is." The grandmother's name was Celestine. Nyla visited her on Sunday afternoons, the same as she always had. Celestine was 83 and sharp in the way that very old women who have survived very difficult things are sharp. Not all of her memory was intact, but what was intact was precise and direct and occasionally withering. 6 weeks after the night at the tower, Nyla sat across from her in the sunroom of the Lakeview facility and told her in broad outline what the past month had been. Not everything. Enough. Celestine listened with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes very clear. When Nyla finished, the old woman was quiet for a moment. "The man," she said. "He loves you." "Yes," Nyla said. "And you." "It's complicated." Celestine made a sound that was not quite dismissive but was adjacent to it. "Everything worth having is complicated. The question isn't complicated. Do you want it or don't you?" Nyla looked at her grandmother's hands, the rings she still wore, the knuckles enlarged with age, the hands of a woman who had made a life out of very little and held it together through pure determined presence. "I want it," she said, "on my terms." Celestine nodded once. "Then tell him your terms and stop making it complicated." "I did," Nyla said. "And?" "And he said yes." The old woman smiled. It was a complete smile, not qualified, not cautious. "Then what are you sitting here talking to me for?" Nyla laughed, actually laughed, full and real, and it had been long enough since she had laughed like that she noticed it, the physical fact of it, how it felt in her chest, open, unguarded, nothing managed. "I'm sitting here because you're my grandmother," she said, "and because this building is the reason I'm alive, and I'm grateful for it." Celestine reached across and patted her hand once firmly. "Go do something with yourself," she said. In the 7th week, Nyla attended her first full executive meeting as something other than the person who had organized it. There were 9 people at the table. She was one of them. She had a folder in front of her and a water glass, and she sat in a chair that was not the chair outside the door and was not the waiting chair across from her own desk, but the chair at the table where the decisions happened, 3 seats from Lucien at the far end. Nobody commented. Nobody needed to. She had known enough of these 9 people long enough and had done enough in the past 6 weeks for there to be no comment that was worth making. The meeting ran 2 hours. At the 40-minute mark, she caught an error in a logistics projection that had cascaded from an incorrect base figure, a simple arithmetic mistake that had compounded through 3 linked forecasts and that would have produced a significant discrepancy at the quarterly review. She flagged it. She walked through the correction. The man who had produced the projection, one of Reeves's former direct reports, now temporarily managing the department, nodded and made the correction without comment. It took 4 minutes. The meeting continued. At the end, as people were gathering their folders and pushing back their chairs, the silver-haired man, whose name was actually Ferrante, she had learned, and who was older than the organization itself and answered to nobody in this room but was present at every significant meeting like a fixed star, caught her eye across the table. He held her gaze for 2 seconds. Then he gave her a single small nod. It was not a welcome. It was something more specific than a welcome. The particular acknowledgement of someone who has been watching closely and has completed their assessment. She held it and nodded once in return. That evening she stayed late. Not because there was work that required it, but because she had taken to staying late in the past weeks, partly because there was always something and partly because the building had a different quality at night. Quieter, more honest somehow. The daytime performance of it stripped away and just the structure left. She was finishing a report when she heard his footsteps, and she did not look up because she always knew his footsteps, and the knowing of them was something she had stopped pretending not to know. He stopped in the doorway of the antechamber. "Go home," he said. "In a minute." He didn't move. She finished the sentence she was on, saved the file, closed the laptop. She looked up. He was leaning against the doorframe with his jacket off and his tie loosened, and there was something in the way he was looking at her that had been building for 6 weeks. Through the reconstruction and the meetings and the careful professional distance she had maintained, not out of uncertainty, but out of the same instinct that had told her to decline the deed to the apartment building. The instinct that said, let the thing be what it is, in the open, earned and true, before you take it. She had taken the time she said she needed. Not 6 months, 6 weeks. Because some things you can calibrate from the inside and some things you simply know, and she had always been better at knowing than at calibrating. Lucien, she said. Yes. I'm done being careful. He looked at her across the quiet room. All right, he said. She stood up. She picked up her bag. She crossed the antechamber and stopped in front of him in the doorway and looked at him directly, the same way she had looked at him 100 times in 3 years. And the difference now was only that she let him see what was underneath the looking, all of it. The thing she had filed under not my business and locked away, and that had run out of drawer space on a rooftop at 4:30 in the morning. He put his hand against the side of her face again, the same as on the night of the tower, just his hand, just present. And she turned her face slightly into it and felt his thumb against her cheekbone, and the city was outside and the building was quiet, and all the dangerous, complicated truth of the past 3 years was exactly what it was. Take me home, she said. He didn't say anything. He lowered his hand to hers, and they walked to the elevator together, and the doors closed, and Chicago rose up around the glass tower and held them both, indifferent and enormous, and entirely unchanged by everything that had happened inside it. She was not the woman who had submitted a resignation letter 7 weeks ago. That woman had wanted clean edges and ordinary safety and a future with nothing dangerous living inside the walls. This woman had sat across from the most powerful criminal in Chicago and found the crack in his organization that his entire security apparatus had missed. She had walked into a room with Elsa Voss and held her nerve when her shoulder was screaming and her heart was doing things hearts do when the situation is that specific kind of bad. She had sat in a care facility conference room at midnight and drawn the map that ended it all. She had earned every inch of the ground she was standing on. The elevator opened on the lobby, the marble floors, the hideous sculptures that she now thought, inexplicably, she might actually miss if they were ever replaced. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago did, alive and cold and indifferent and magnificent, 39 floors below the place where her whole life had changed and a lifetime above the ordinary future she had thought she wanted. She walked out into it. Lucien walked out beside her. And the city took them both in without ceremony, because that was what cities did. They kept moving, indifferent to any single story inside them, indifferent to who had won or lost or changed, the lights burning and the wind off the lake, and the long, cold streets running in every direction as far as anyone could see. The story did not announce itself as over. It simply continued, differently, with both of them in it. That was enough. That was, she thought, exactly enough.